All right, this will be a video about all the scientists who have been dying recently in the United States, which is a very intriguing mystery, and it's the talk of Washington, D.C., according to this article here. And one thing that isn't talked about as much is that there's a number of Chinese scientists who've died recently as well. So this may be kind of like a piece to the puzzle when you're trying to figure out what's going on here. And I'll talk about these Chinese scientists' deaths a little later on. But I wanted to start out this video by talking about this mystery from the 1980s, which is sometimes called the Marconi Murders. And this happened when around 30 engineers and scientists in Britain committed suicide and died in these just really brutal and gruesome ways during the 1980s. And most of them worked at Marconi Electronic Systems, which was this huge military contractor involved in just a bunch of top secret projects. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as the Marconi deaths. And this Marconi deaths mystery from the 1980s just has a ton in common with this recent outbreak of dead scientists. So I'm going to first talk about some of the theories that people had for these Marconi deaths in the 1980s, then look at whether this could help explain this current group of dead scientists. So, first off, groups of scientists dying around the same time is nothing new. In the 1960s, there was this Israel Mossad operation named Operation Damocles. Egypt had imported a bunch of German scientists to help them develop a long range missile program, and the Mossad killed a bunch of these scientists and they abducted others and threatened them with death. And Operation Damocles worked. The death of these scientists sabotaged the missile program, and the remaining scientists were so scared for their lives that they left Egypt. Then in 1979, pretty much the exact same thing happened. Iraq was building a nuclear reactor and Israel was opposed to it, and a bunch of top Iraqi scientists were murdered and poisoned, and the remaining scientists became so scared for their lives that Saddam Hussein gave them cash bonuses and luxury cars to continue to work on the program. But the deaths of these scientists, which included the murder of Iraq's top nuclear scientist who was leading the program, it just totally sabotaged this program too. And in an operation named Operation Opera, the Israeli Air Force destroyed this nuclear facility in June of 1981. But when it comes to groups of scientists dying off, nothing beats the Marconi deaths from the 1980s. This is just an awesome mystery to look into. So during the 1980s, there was a group of around 30 scientists in Britain who died in oftentimes really just brutal and bizarre ways. Many of them had links to or they worked for Marconi Electronic Systems, and they were working on some very advanced top secret technology and projects. Arsad Sharif was a computer scientist working on missile guidance systems at Marconi, and in October of 1986, he drove 100 miles away from his London home to Bristol, then tied one end of a rope around his neck and the other end of the rope around a tree trunk. He gunned the accelerator in his car and he decapitated himself. And this was ruled a suicide, so definitely an odd way to commit suicide, and police also found a metal pipe on the front seat of his car that could have been used to wedge down the accelerator. In February of 1987, two other scientists and engineers named David Skeels and Peter Papel were found dead in their garages with tubes in their mouths connected to the exhaust pipes of their running cars. Later on, two more engineers died by suicide by exhaust pipe as well. Another scientist named John Whitman died when he drowned in his bathtub, which is a curious way to die, and there have been a number of suspicious drowning in a bathtub deaths over the years. Definitely seems like this is some sort of calling card or code. There was an engineer named Alistair Beckham who spent a Sunday afternoon gardening, and then he went to his shed and attached electrical wires to his chest. He plugged those into an electrical socket and he electrocuted himself to death. And there was also a director at Marconi named Peter Ferry who jammed electrical wires into his metal tooth fillings, and he also died by electrocuting himself to death. Two other scientists were found with plastic bags over their heads and their feet bound, and their deaths were ruled death by sexual misadventure. David Sands worked on computer guidance systems at a company owned by Marconi, and he crashed his car at a high speed into an empty building, and his car had been loaded up with cans of gasoline, which caused this huge explosion that killed him upon impact. And those are just a few. So all in all, there are about 30 scientists and engineers, almost all of whom worked for Marconi or had links to Marconi, who were part of these Marconi deaths. And you can find the full list of the deaths here on this site, Project Camelot. Now, many of these scientists were working on or were rumored to be working on the Strategic Defense Initiative, or the Star Wars Missile Defense System as it was sometimes called. So in 1983, the United States announced they were going to build a system of satellites equipped with lasers that could shoot down missiles the Soviet Union might launch. And this was sold to the public as a defensive system, but there were worries from the start that this laser satellite system could be used as an offensive weapon to strike first. This article here, entire cities can be burned with Star Wars satellites. This appeared on the front page of the LA Times all the way back in 1987. The opening line of the article says laser weapons being developed as part of President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative could more easily be used to incinerate enemy cities than to protect the United States against Soviet missiles, according to an article in the current issue of a leading physics magazine and a separate study being circulated among government weapons scientists. So this was like the ultimate weapon, and Marconi was one of the companies building this system. And the first, most prominent theory with these dead Marconi scientists was that, like Israel and Operation Damocles, these scientists were being killed by the Soviets to sabotage the Star Wars program. Because so many of these people possess very specialized knowledge, and just a few deaths could delay or even ruin the project. If you go back to when Israel targeted the Iraq scientists in 1979, when Iraq's top nuclear scientist was beaten to death in France in June of 1980, it was claimed that his death alone would set back the Iraq nuclear program by 2 years. There was also speculation that some of these Marconi scientists had been tortured for information. That's why so many of their deaths were just so brutal. And another theory had to do with a bunch of fraud that was discovered at Marconi in 1990, and some executives were forced to resign because of this. So, this theory went that some of the dead scientists were going to blow the whistle about this fraud, and they were killed to silence them. So there were a couple different theories, but the prevailing theory was that these scientists were killed by a foreign government to sabotage the programs they were working on, and this definitely seems like it could be an explanation for this recent outbreak of scientist deaths as well. So as everyone probably knows by now, there's around 15 or so scientists in the United States who've died recently, and like the Marconi scientists, they were all seemingly involved in some very important projects. Three scientists who went missing or died worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and this renowned astrophysicist Carl Grillmeyer was shot and killed on his doorstep in the small town of Llano, California. Then there were also four scientists in New Mexico, including a couple who worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, who all went missing, and one of the missing is Neil McCasland, who went for a walk in February of 2026, and he was never seen again. He had worked at Roswell, and previously he had led the research center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and his disappearance was described as a, quote, grave national security crisis because he, quote, has some of the most sensitive secrets of the United States in his head. Nuno Loureiro, who was head of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, he was shot and killed at his apartment in Brookline, Massachusetts, and colleagues described him as brilliant, and he was rumored to be working with the Department of Defense, and he may have even had a top secret security clearance as well. And there's a couple more people with very interesting backgrounds in this group who I'll talk about in a bit, but I first wanted to talk about these Chinese scientists who are dying off, because there's a big group of Chinese scientists who are dying too, and it hasn't been talked about as much, but it's just as strange as the US deaths. Zheng Shaoxin was an expert on space, and he was involved in space weather research, and he died in a car crash in December of 2024. Chen Shuming also died in a car accident. He was described as a, quote, leader of China's high-end weapon chip research and development team. There was Zhang Daibing, who was a drone expert who was rumored to have committed suicide in January of 2025. And then Feng Yang Hu was probably the most notable death. He was only 38 years old, and he was described as an artificial intelligence genius who was leading AI programs for the Chinese military. And he died in a car wreck in July 2023 at 2 in the morning. So in all, there's about 10 to 15 Chinese scientists who've died also. And like the American deaths, a lot of these people were involved in just really top secret and major projects for the military. So it seems like the obvious explanation here is that this is like a modern day Operation Damocles or a modern day Marconi Murders, only it's two sides killing off each other's scientists to sabotage each other's work. So it's basically like a scientist war that's going on behind the scenes. But I do think there might have been something else going on with at least a few of these deaths. And of all the recent deaths, Amy Eskridge is probably the most interesting one. So she was a scientist who claimed she was working on projects involving anti-gravity, and she was definitely connected to a lot of important people in advanced research. Her father worked under Werner von Braun, who was one of the founders of NASA.
So my dad was the technical lead of the Advanced Propulsion Lab at NASA Marshall, again, the propulsion capital of the world. And I was listening to my dad moan and complain about NASA being inefficient and about how we could like do anti-gravity if they fucking funded us for my entire life. My brain is wired from birth, my entire development. My brain developed under the conditions of listening to the technical lead of the Advanced Propulsion Lab of NASA Marshall, the propulsion capital of the world, complain about how no one was funding him and he had great ideas.
She committed suicide in 2022, but most likely it wasn't a suicide. She texted a friend shortly before this saying, "If it's reported that I committed suicide, I most definitely did not." And she talked about how she was really paranoid that something might happen to her because she was being followed. Now, the really interesting thing with her is that right before her death, she founded the Institute for Exotic Sciences, whose purpose was to disclose anti gravity technology and other advanced technology to the public.
I started the Institute for one reason. One reason, the Institute. I started it as a public facing persona to disclose anti gravity technology through.
You can find this video here online. It's claimed that this is her final interview before her death, and it's a Zoom call she's having with a couple other people. And the purpose of this call is to talk about their strategy for disclosure and how they're going to get this information out to the public. Because that was the main obstacle they faced, since she claimed the information they were going to disclose was so sensitive.
So, my vision of disclosure, I like the library thing, sending it to libraries on a certain day. What I had sort of envisioned is I want to publish the paper on archive.com. We need partnerships well ahead of time, period. Like, you can't be calling these people to be like, can I disclose UFOs tomorrow? And so we need to pick, Mark and I have been talking about this already. We need to pick the most credible person we can possibly get who will publish it and talk about it on TV. I was thinking Tucker Carlson needs to be the one.
Then, shortly after this Zoom call, and after telling her friend that she was not suicidal, she committed suicide. So, it definitely seems like she could have been killed to prevent her from disclosing whatever it was that she planned to disclose. And the disappearance of this Air Force General McCasland has some similarities to this as well. He was the one in charge of research at Wright-Patterson and was described as having some of the most sensitive secrets of the United States in his head. And the rock band Blink 182 kind of ties in with his story. So, one of the members of Blink 182, Tom DeLonge, he was very interested in UFOs and he founded this organization named To the Stars, which wanted to disclose government files and information about UFOs and hidden technology. There are emails from Tom DeLonge where he mentions how he's been working with General McCasland. This email here is actually from Tom DeLonge to Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager, John Podesta. And he says that he'd given McCasland a 4-hour presentation recently on his To the Stars project, and that McCasland was, quote, not only aware of what I'm trying to achieve, he helped me assemble my advisory team. He's a very important man. So this email is actually from 2016. It's not a recent email, but it definitely gives the impression that McCasland was interested in disclosing information about UFOs and advanced technologies to the public, given the fact that he was working with Tom DeLonge and they met for 4 hours. So it's definitely possible that he was planning to disclose something and he was killed to prevent that. And then the last death that could tie into all this is David Wilcock, who was a longtime UFO researcher, and in April of 2026, he committed suicide. And he had a huge following. He was very well known. He'd basically devoted his life to researching and disclosing UFOs and hidden advanced technologies. Just days before his death, he mentioned that he had some very intense stuff going on that weekend, so you do wonder if he was working with some people to disclose something big. Now, Amy Eskridge died in 2022, and General McCasland went missing months before David Wilcock's death, so it probably wasn't either of them that he was working with, but it does seem like there's some sort of group or just some assorted people who really want to disclose some sort of hidden advanced technology to the public, and there's another group who's willing to go to very great lengths to ensure that this technology remains hidden. So that's what it seems like to me, that these deaths are loosely linked to each other, but they're also kind of separate. Some of these could be a Marconi deaths type sabotage war between two enemy countries, and some of them could be to prevent disclosure of some sort of advanced technology that's being hidden from the public. And then lastly, I will say that I do find all of the attention being paid to this all of a sudden just a little suspicious because these recent scientists' deaths have all happened over the course of like 3 or 4 years. So it's not like they're just all happening all at once. And there was just no coverage or attention being paid to any of this until a few weeks ago. It wasn't being talked about or covered anywhere. When these deaths actually happened, no one covered it at all. And now, all of a sudden, with some other really major stuff going on, like the Epstein files and the war in Iran, now this dead scientist mystery is being just covered everywhere and everybody's talking about it. So I do wonder if this story is being used as like a wag the dog type distraction to get people to focus on this instead of the war in Iran or the Epstein files or some of these other things. Let me know in the comments what you think. There's definitely no shortage of coverage or theories about this case. Like I said, it's just being talked about everywhere. And then lastly, thanks as always to the members here on YouTube and the supporters on Patreon. You guys are just awesome, and I truly, truly appreciate the support. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you soon with another one.